Just after the divorce, my ex-husband and I bumped into each other right outside the obstetrics and gynecology department. Seeing the pregnancy test report in my hand, his face turned cold. Abort it. The position of my wife can only belong to Selena, as you know, a child won't sway me. Without waiting for my explanation, he sent someone to forcibly take me to a private clinic, instructing the doctor to arrange for a pregnancy termination procedure. This wasn't the first time. But the issue was, the child I'm carrying isn't yours either? In early autumn, the ground was covered with fallen sycamore leaves, and the wind brought a refreshing coolness. Adrian's assistant, Ryan, upon hearing my words, showed no fluctuation in his eyes behind the glasses, merely repeating formulaically, "Miss Vivian, Adrian's patience is limited. You should be aware that what he despises most are such unseemly tactics." Having been by Adrian's side for 5 years, he had long mastered how to fully execute his boss's will. His gaze fell on my flat abdomen as he inquired, "How many weeks pregnant are you?" 8 weeks. He nodded, adjusting his glasses. "That coincides rather conveniently with the timing of your divorce from Adrian." As Adrian's loyal subordinate, he had seen too many women attempting to latch on. And I, the recently ousted ex-wife, was undoubtedly the most suspicious one. I took out my phone from my bag, intending to show him photos of me and my fiancé. But he raised his hand to stop me. "Miss Vivian, these are meaningless. Adrian places great importance on matters of bloodline. He will not allow an unclear child to disrupt his life with Miss Selena. If you still fail to recognize your position, Adrian won't mind helping you see it clearly once more." My fingertips holding the phone paused for a moment. Sunlight filtered through the sparse leaves, landing on his lenses. I followed his gaze. In the back seat of the black Bentley at the street corner, the window was half lowered. The man's profile lines were cold and hard, indifferently watching this side. He was waiting. Waiting for me to be easily manipulated by him as before, turning pale and panicking. Control was an instinct ingrained in his bones. And my pregnancy was another challenge to his authority. I put away my phone, gently exhaled, and said to Ryan, "Please convey to Mr. Adrian that I don't want to experience that feeling a second time." My tone was calm. "I have plans for my life. The trope of relying on a child for status is too cliched. This truly is the child of me and my fiancé." I had indeed experienced something similar once. It was in the 2nd year of our commercial marriage. An accident led to 2 lines appearing on the pregnancy test. That was the first time in my 26 years of life that I felt a wondrous connection with another life. Almost immediately, I harbored some unrealistic fantasies about the future. Adrian and I had no feelings for each other. Our marriage was merely a contract for exchanging benefits. But naively, I thought that a child might add a bit of warmth to this cold agreement. I hid it from him, wanting to secretly keep the child. Until at a family banquet, due to morning sickness, I frequently retched. His sister Cindy, who had always disliked me, half-jokingly asked in front of everyone if I was pregnant. I clearly remember that Adrian's action of picking up food paused for a moment. That sharp gaze directly aimed at my abdomen. His life was a precise chess game, allowing no piece to escape control. This unexpected child was the biggest variable in his game. Moreover, I foolishly concealed it from him. That was the first time he truly got angry at me. He left me alone on the villa's terrace, his voice ice-cold. "Vivian, haven't I told you to behave yourself? Did I overestimate your intelligence or underestimate your ambition? I'll give you 1 night to think it through. If you still can't grasp your identity, get out of the Lynn family immediately." The rain that night was heavy. The cold rainwater hit my face as I gazed at the dark night sky, touching my still flat abdomen, feeling despair for the first time. It turned out that in his eyes, the so-called husband and wife didn't even have the most basic trust. I was merely an object in one of his many transactions, signed to a long-term contract. The fetus was only 7 weeks old at that time, and the doctor said my constitution was cold-prone. A forced abortion would cause significant harm to my body. But the man merely replied indifferently over the phone, and then? "Does this have anything to do with me?" Everyone in the circle knew he had a first love named Selena. For her, he remained chaste. Even in marriage, he treated me only as a shield and a tool for release. Ridiculously, even as a tool, I wasn't entitled to my own thoughts. What he needed was an absolutely obedient heir, not a child carrying my impure bloodline. In the end, I lay on the operating table. No crying, no fussing. Just in the second before the anesthesia took effect, I seemed to see him standing outside the operating room's glass window, his expression indifferent. Later, due to postoperative complications, I stayed in the hospital for half a month. On the day of discharge, he sent Ryan to pick me up, delivering a new agreement and a black card. Adrian said, "This is your compensation." Additionally, the agreement has an added clause, hoping Mrs. Shen will strictly adhere to contraceptive measures in the future and not cause trouble for everyone again. Looking at that agreement, I slowly smiled. I understand. What he liked most about me was this: sensible, understanding, never causing him trouble. From that day on, I completely gave up hope. Our marriage had only 3 years left in countdown. Every day, I crossed off a day on the calendar, anticipating the day of liberation. "Miss Vivian, it's best if you can put our minds at ease." Ryan's voice pulled me back from my memories. "In a few days, I'll arrange a paternity test. I'll accompany you throughout." He was clearly afraid I'd play tricks and forge the results. I nodded, "Okay." He formulaically handed over a business card, his tone carrying a warning: "If Miss Vivian needs anything, you can contact me directly. Adrian and Miss Selena's happy event is approaching. I hope you won't do anything to make everyone unhappy. After all, Miss Selena is in poor health and can't handle stimulation." Of course, I knew. Before the divorce, I had cleared all contacts related to Adrian. Even our marital home, I entrusted to an agent to sell as soon as possible. If not for bumping into him at the hospital today, we would never have intersected again in this lifetime. And that Miss Selena was his first love whom he had waited for 10 years. I forced a smile and nodded. "Then I wish Mr. Adrian and Miss Selena a happy marriage for 100 years. The clouds on the horizon were thick, and the sunlight became stingy. I wrapped my trench coat tightly, turned around, and walked along the sycamore-lined street toward home. That cold gaze remained fixed on my back. Many years ago, he had clearly stated that his marriage would only serve interests. Selena was his love. And I was merely a stepping stone to greater benefits. I had always been clear-headed, soberly watching myself gradually sink and then climb back up in this loveless marriage. It wasn't until today that I realized. It turned out all the rules were set for outsiders like me. The first love was forever outside the rules. Even if she did nothing, she could receive all his favoritism and exceptions. No one knew why Selena, Adrian's first love whom he had waited for 10 years, suddenly returned to the country. But I seemed to know. I had a very strange dream where Selena went abroad back then to pursue a foreign tycoon. After succeeding, she didn't live happily there. Although the tycoon was wealthy, he was a control freak with violent tendencies. Marrying such a tycoon, Selena did not live as satisfactorily as expected. Thus, she chose to return to Adrian's side. To test if Adrian still had lingering feelings for her, she specifically arranged to meet me before our divorce, still at that coffee shop we often visited. The woman wore an elegant white dress, her face without makeup, but her eyes carried scrutiny and fatigue. She tried hard to appear pure and unworldly, but the calculation and weariness in her eyes couldn't deceive anyone. In contrast, these 3 years of luxurious life had nurtured me well. My whole being exuded a lazy and composed aura, carefully pampered by wealth. This deepened the resentment in her eyes. She only asked me 3 questions. "How long have you been married?" Holding my coffee cup, I replied unhurriedly, 3 years and 2 months. Everyone around Adrian knew our marriage contract was for 3 years. The extra 2 months were waiting for her return. The woman in front of me seemed dissatisfied with this precise answer but maintained her composure, smiling. "It's been that long." "Then, has he touched you?" This was her second question. I was stunned for a moment. She quickly realized this question was somewhat ridiculous. After all, it was a 3-year legal marriage, and Adrian was a normal man. How could there be no marital relations? But I didn't mind saying what she wanted to hear. In the first year of marriage, no. Adrian had indeed remained chaste for her for a year. She seemed to finally confirm her weight in Adrian's heart, visibly relieved. Her smile became genuine, and her tone carried a hint of playful reproach. Is that so? It's all my fault for returning too late. She immediately asked the last question. Then do you kiss? Kissing, in her definition, was a symbol of love. She needed this to prove that all of Adrian's intimacies with me were merely from physiological needs, not emotions. The air seemed to solidify. She stared intently at my expression, not missing the slightest change. I had a moment of daze, then quickly answered, no. Her tense body instantly relaxed. All unease and vigilance turned into the triumph of a victor. Okay, I understand. These 3 years, thank you for taking care of Adrian. She then assumed the posture of the hostess, her tone even carrying a bit of intimate complaint. He's just like that, cold and not very caring. You must have suffered a lot. I didn't respond, just faintly hummed in agreement. I had anticipated this day, so I didn't have much emotional fluctuation. I thought, as a tool in a commercial marriage, I had exited gracefully. However, I still lied to her. Adrian didn't resist kissing, especially in bed. He liked seeing me kiss to the point of oxygen deprivation, eyes reddening, only able to cling to him and beg for mercy. That gave him a sense of absolute control and satisfaction. Although there was no love, such intimate moments occasionally made me illusion that we were just an ordinary couple. You see, women are always easily moved by these insignificant details, then willingly sacrifice their true hearts for this false tenderness. Even I couldn't escape that. Night fell quickly. Returning home, the apartment was pitch black. Ethan hadn't returned yet. He was a surgeon at a tertiary hospital in the city, often busy and out of sight. We met at an industry summit. He was an invited medical expert, while I attended as Adrian's wife accompanying him. He was probably the first person I knew who didn't treat me differently because of the title Adrian's wife. Gentle, polite, with clear eyes, chatting with him was relaxing. After the divorce, I moved out of that cold villa and became his neighbor. Gradually, we became familiar. I turned on the living room light. The warm light dispelled the room's coldness. On the table was a bunch of fresh sunflowers, with a note pressed beside it. Vivian, there's an emergency surgery tonight, might return late. I made your favorite pickled fish, remember to eat it while hot. Ethan. His handwriting was beautiful, with strong strokes. Picking up the note, a warmth surged in my heart. The aroma of pickled fish mixed with the fresh scent of sunflowers completely pulled me out of that unpleasant encounter in the afternoon. In the 3 years with Adrian, what I ate most were various expensive but bland nutritional meals. Because he disliked heavy flavors, the entire villa's kitchen had no bottle of chili sauce. I once thought my latter half of life would be spent in such boring, insipid living. Until I met Ethan. He remembered all my casually mentioned preferences, would take me to bustling night markets, accompany me to eat street food, and tell me that life isn't just about interests and calculations, there are many small beauties. I pinched my palm. Vivian, you can't look back anymore. You've escaped that luxurious cage. You absolutely can't be dragged back into the abyss by anything related to the past. On Wednesday, I took Ethan's hair sample, sealed it in a bag, and put it in my purse. At the appointed private clinic, I saw not only Ryan but also Selena. Compared to her plain appearance last time, today she looked much more luxurious. Wearing the latest season's Chanel suit, carrying a limited edition Hermès bag. Exquisite makeup covered all her fatigue, even the calculation in her eyes was diminished under the cover of luxury. Money is indeed the best nourishment for a woman. I stopped, nodding to her, Miss Selena. She ignored me, just scanning my abdomen back and forth with those venomous eyes. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward. Ryan timely spoke, breaking the silence. Miss Selena is worried and came specially to see. If Miss Vivian has a clear conscience, you surely won't mind. I gripped my bag strap, smiled, it's fine. Miss Selena has also prepared Adrian's hair sample. Testing together will be more convincing. Ryan spoke impeccably. I didn't respond, directly handing over the sealed bag in my hand. After the blood draw, coming out of the clinic, it unexpectedly started drizzling outside. The cold rain threads hitting the face caused inexplicable irritation. That familiar black Bentley was parked not far by the roadside. The man leaned against the car door, a cigarette between his fingertips, the scarlet ember flickering in the gloomy sky. Due to the long wait, his face showed some impatience. It had been only a month since the divorce, he hadn't changed much. But I felt like I had lived half a lifetime. I originally wanted to pretend not to see and slip away quietly. But the next second, the man's gaze precisely locked onto me. The surrounding pedestrians seemed to sense the low pressure emanating from him, automatically making way for him. I could only brace myself, meet his gaze, and force a polite smile. Mr. Adrian, what a coincidence. Not a coincidence. He exhaled a smoke ring, his gaze circling my abdomen. It seems the last lesson wasn't enough. Making you think you can use the same tactics to disgust me again. I explained, you've misunderstood. But he extinguished the cigarette and approached me step by step. Misunderstood? He repeated the words in a low voice as if hearing a huge joke. Timing, motive, you have them all, and now you tell me it's a misunderstanding? His leather shoes stepped on the wet ground, making muffled sounds, each like stepping on my heart. Vivian, divorced from me for less than 3 months, and pregnant for 8 weeks. Tell me, which man could make you forget your identity so quickly, forget our agreement? The harsh words, paired with his self-righteous inference, left me speechless for a moment. You've been my wife for 3 years, how have you not improved at all? Don't use such stupid tactics, and don't force me to tear away your last shred of dignity. The man looked down at me scrutinizingly, every word ice cold. He was always like this, selfish, arrogant, measuring everything with his cold business logic. The appearance of this child once again touched his sore spot. The cold rainwater accentuated his ruthless features. I took a deep breath, not wanting to make any futile explanations. I raised my head, for the first time looking straight into his eyes, then called him by name. Adrian, I said exceptionally clearly, do you think my life has no other possibilities besides you? Finding someone I love to marry, having our own child, this was originally part of my plan. The report isn't out yet, on what basis are you convicting me now? Moisture welled up in my eyes as I asked him in a stubborn tone. Why won't you believe me just once? Adrian. He looked at me silently, the coldness in his eyes not melting at all. Until a drop of cold rainwater slid down my cheek. His fingers at his side moved imperceptibly. He averted his gaze, his lips pursed into a rigid line. Showing weakness seemed always effective on him. After 3 years, I somewhat understood what he fell for. He stepped back, creating distance between us. After a moment, he looked back at me, his voice carrying a warning, Vivian, you'd better ensure everything you said is true. Of course. The report will be out in a week, Mr. Adrian will surely get the answer you want. The man stared at my back, a trace of complex emotion in his gaze. An answer he wanted? His chest suddenly surged with inexplicable irritability. Was it his? Or not? He suddenly realized that neither answer could satisfy him. Everyone thought I wanted to bind Adrian with a child. But in fact, I had long lost any attachment to the position of Mrs. Adrian. In the first year of our marriage, I did have unrealistic fantasies. I thought that as long as I did well enough, was obedient and sensible enough, one day I could warm his cold heart. People always like to describe emotional miracles with love grows over time. So at 25, I naively thought I could wait for that miracle too. The year I met him, I had just graduated from university. The family business was on the brink of bankruptcy, my father turned white-haired overnight. It was him, Adrian, descending like a god, saving the Shin family with a 3-year marriage contract. I think anyone in such a desperate situation would develop an incurable dependence and admiration for their savior. Not to mention Adrian's impeccable appearance and temperament. So I willingly played the perfect wife, accompanying him to various business events, managing everything at home, even acting as a loving couple in front of his ill-intentioned relatives. I thought that as long as I tried hard enough, he would eventually see my goodness. The women around him changed wave after wave, but the wife position remained mine. This gave me a ridiculous illusion. It wasn't until Selena returned that I fully awoke. The class gap and exchange of interests could never be filled by emotions. I knew this clearly. So, from the moment I signed the divorce agreement, he was no longer any role in my life plan. The report came out on Friday. Following Ryan's notification, I arrived at the restaurant we used to frequent. Selena was already waiting in the private room, looking particularly relaxed. I was about to reach for the report that would decide my fate. But Ryan held my hand, his face still showing that businesslike detachment. Since Miss Vivian is so confident, why not let Miss Selena reveal the result for us? My heart sank, a bad premonition surging up. Selena's smile at the corners of her mouth could no longer be hidden, like a general certain of victory appreciating her defeated opponent's final struggle. She leisurely opened the report, glanced at it, and with a slap, threw Adrian's copy onto the table. Miss Vivian, what Adrian hates most is deception, especially regarding children. My gaze fell on the report. That bold line clearly stated, based on DNA analysis, it supports Adrian as the biological father of the tested male child, with a paternity probability of 99.99%. Seeing that absurd report, my breathing inevitably paused. Ryan tactfully exited the room, leaving the space to me and Selena. I had a moment of daze, then picked up the report and read it again unhurriedly. Seeing me like this, Selena thought I was making a last desperate struggle, her smug smile almost reaching her ears. "Why aren't you speaking? Miss Vivian, are you racking your brains on how to cover your lie? I understand the desire to marry into wealth, but Adrian and I are about to get engaged. What are you trying to achieve by pulling this, to disgust whom?" I quickly figured out the key point. No wonder she was so confident today. It turned out she had dug a pit for me long ago, waiting for me to jump in. Perhaps my excessive docility in the Lynn family these 3 years made her think I was a soft persimmon to be pinched at will. Unfortunately, before marrying Adrian, I had rolled in the business world helping my father for years, and I'd seen plenty of dirty tricks. Today's sample collection was entirely under her and Ryan's watch. Now thinking back, they could easily tamper by switching the samples I brought with a simple maneuver. I gently placed the report back on the table, my eyes carrying some pity. "Selena, you're really afraid of me." Her smile froze instantly. I leaned forward, approaching her, saying each word clearly and slowly, "You know better than anyone that this child can't be Adrian's. But you insist on confirming it as his, right?" She was like a cat whose tail was stepped on, her pupils dilating, but still forcing, "What nonsense are you talking? You went to such lengths just to let Adrian see this so-called ironclad proof with his own eyes, right? To make him fully believe that I, Vivian, am a woman who would do anything to cling to power. So he can tear away my last bit of dignity, grinding the remaining affection from the past 3 years into disgust and hatred." Her face visibly turned ashen, her voice rising an octave. "I don't know what crazy talk you're saying." The curve of my mouth widened, mercilessly piercing her self-perceived clever thoughts. "You want him to personally push me far away, best if we never meet again in life or death, to eliminate future troubles forever. Because you know better than anyone that Adrian taboos bloodline confusion most and values legitimacy above all. So, you gave him the reason he can't tolerate me the most." Yes, her greatest fear was never the child in my belly, but the wavering old feelings in Adrian's heart. She had to personally extinguish this last spark. 3 years of marriage, day and night together, this was much more solid than her ethereal youthful memories. How could she not be afraid? She suddenly stood up, slamming her palm on the table, making the report jump. She simply went all out. "Now, this is the fact. I've already sent the report to Adrian. He'll only believe this now, even if you speak eloquently. In his eyes, you're just a clown full of lies. I smiled indifferently, leaning back on the soft sofa, countering, do you think your position in his heart is so unshakable? That's 3 years, Selena. The more furious she became, the calmer I was. 3 years that you can't erase no matter what means you use. She was thoroughly enraged, each word poisoned. Vivian, you're the one not loved. Get it straight. What about 3 years? If I hadn't left back then, when would the position of Mrs. Adrian fall to a destitute like you? Letting you take advantage for 3 years, being a rich wife for 3 years, have you really forgotten what you are? I neither confirmed nor denied, tilting my head to look at her, my eyes full of mockery. What, is Miss Selena jealous? She let out a sharp cold laugh. Jealous? What would I be jealous of you for? He just treated you as a tool to satisfy physiological needs and appease the family. Oh, right, didn't you get pregnant with his child back then? Did he want it? As for this one now, she suddenly extended her finger, her nail painted bright red almost poking my belly, her face showing unmasked malice. Do you think the outcome will be different? Let me tell you, even if this is really Adrian's seed, being born won't change your lowly origins. He'll just be like you, cursed behind his back for life. An illegitimate bastard unfit for the stage. My face finally darkened completely, unable to maintain that deliberate calm anymore. I abruptly stood up, picked up the freshly refilled lemon water beside me, and splashed it fiercely at her distorted face. Adrian pushed the door open at this moment. What he saw at a glance was Selena with her face full of water stains, disheveled hair, looking like she had suffered a great injustice. He didn't even need to think, the conclusion was already formed. The man's handsome face was expressionless. He picked up the half bottle of red wine left in the decanter on the table, walked to me, and poured it precisely over my head. The action was smooth, without half a hesitation. Have you caused enough trouble? His voice was flat, without discernible joy or anger, but carrying icy chill. The cool liquid slid down my hair, over my cheeks, soaking my cashmere sweater. The red wine made me look wretched, like a ghost crawling out of a murder scene. The bone-chilling cold made me shiver uncontrollably. I closed my eyes, having a moment of trance. It seemed like returning to 3 years ago, shortly after we married. Also in such a restaurant, he was entertaining an important partner. Due to nervousness, I accidentally spilled wine on the other's pant leg while pouring. He also stood up expressionlessly, in front of the whole table, pouring a full glass of whiskey over my head. With the same indifferent tone, he commanded, "What are you standing there for? Apologize." But unlike 3 years ago, this time I felt no grievance or unwillingness in my heart, only finding it laughable. Laughable to the point that tears were about to overflow from my eyes. I forcibly held back the soreness in my eyes, looking up at his condescending gaze. I opened my mouth, my voice trembling slightly from the cold, enunciating each word, stating a fact I had long recognized. Adrian, I've never done anything to wrong you. These 3 years, I've obeyed you completely. Whatever you asked me to do, I did, even if it was delivering hangover soup to your friends at 3 a.m., I never said no. You asked me to please your business partners, I did, even if their looks and words were frivolous, I smiled and endured. You asked me to abort that child, I did, even if the doctor said I might never conceive again, I accepted it. Haven't I done well enough? Adrian. My eyes finally reddened, but why do you treat me like this? His gaze sank, silent, just looking at me that way. I struggled to pull a smile uglier than crying, tears finally rolling down uncontrollably. I've always been obedient, never caused you any trouble. At divorce, I left with nothing, didn't take a penny of compensation, cut off all possible contacts with you. I even, sincerely hoped you could be happy. My throat choked badly, unable to continue. I just stubbornly stared at him, like a fool insisting on an explanation. Why do you treat me like this? Adrian. These 3 years, I rarely cried in front of him. He didn't like it. The man's dark pupils reflected my wretched appearance. Scalding tears slid down my cheeks. His fingers hanging at his side unconsciously tightened. Decisive when lifting the decanter earlier, now they felt heavy as 1,000 pounds, hard even to lift. He had chaired countless meetings deciding the group's life and death, yet at this moment, for the first time, he didn't know what to say. His cold gaze stuck on the tear stains on my face, unable to move away for a long time. His silence became the last straw crushing me. I could no longer control my emotions, my voice suddenly rising. Why exactly? Why do you all have to disturb my life? Why arbitrarily assume this child must be yours? Why force me to this point? He finally spoke, his voice extremely hoarse, because on the night before our divorce, we did it. Beside him, Selena covered her face, suddenly lifting her head, her eyes full of shock. She probably never imagined that on the night she returned to the country, full of joy waiting for him to pick her up, Adrian was with me, entangled in the marital bed until dawn. Her face instantly turned pale as paper, almost unable to stand, her lips trembling wanting to ask something. But Adrian didn't even glance at her, just staring fixedly at me. I suddenly laughed, but tears flowed more fiercely. So it's just because of that? Adrian, in 3 years of marriage, which night didn't we do it? The times you didn't like using protection, I can't count on 10 fingers. The times I took the pill, not once missed, nothing happened for so many years, how are you so sure that one time got me pregnant? His jawline tensed tightly, flinging the report in his hand onto the table in front of me. Then how do you explain this? It's fake. I almost roared it out. The private room fell into deathly silence. We confronted each other across the table, the air oppressively suffocating. The first to calm down was still me. Adrian, have you forgotten what the doctor said? Looking at him, the tears in my eyes slowly receded, leaving only fatigue and sorrow. After aborting that child, it would be hard for me to get pregnant again. His face was cold enough to freeze. But you are pregnant now. That's because my fiancé is a doctor. I finally said this, feeling completely drained. Adrian, I took the pill every time afterward, that time no exception. You wouldn't allow accidents, right? I hoped even less for accidents than you. But Adrian, what are you doing now? These words instantly pulled him back to reality. Yes. What was he doing? With my head of wet hair, I was almost pleading with him, Adrian, consider me begging you, okay? All the emotions in my eyes, he saw clearly, clear enough to make him panic. But I wasn't begging him to believe me. I said, Adrian, let me go. These 5 words, light as a feather, fell in his ears heavy as 1,000 caddies. His heart ached at this moment, unable to breathe. The private room door was pushed open from outside at this time. Vivian? An anxious male voice came. I turned my head, seeing Ethan standing at the door, still in his white coat, obviously rushing directly from the hospital. Seeing my soaked body and tear-streaked wretched appearance, the anxiety on his face instantly vanished, replaced by deep heartache and anger. He quickly walked in, took off his white coat, and without a word wrapped me tightly in it, blocking Adrian's cold gaze. What happened? How did you end up like this? He wiped my face with his sleeve while asking in a low voice, his tone full of worry. I shook my head, unable to say a word, just burying my face in his white coat smelling of disinfectant, drawing that long-missed warmth. Ethan's gaze, over the top of my head, looked at the report on the table, then fell on Adrian. His eyes were calm but carried a doctor's characteristic scrutiny. Mr. Adrian, we've already called the police. Ethan's voice wasn't loud but clearly reached everyone's ears in the room. Vivian messaged me this afternoon saying she was coming to meet you. After surgery, I was worried, called her but no answer, location showed she was here all along. I just notified the restaurant manager to retrieve the surveillance here. He paused, pulling me tighter into his arms, his voice cooling. I think the surveillance will clearly record what happened today, including who struck first and who forged this ridiculous report. Adrian's pupils contracted sharply. And Selena beside him, upon hearing police and surveillance, her face completely lost color, her body uncontrollably starting to shake. Dr. Ethan, you. Selena wanted to say something but was stopped by Ethan's gaze. Miss Selena, Ethan adjusted his glasses on the nose bridge, the gaze behind the lenses sharp. As a doctor, I need to remind you that slander and forging medical reports both entail legal responsibility. Especially since your target is a pregnant woman. He lowered his head, gently patting my back, his voice returning to that unique gentleness. Vivian, let's go home. I nodded, in his arms, feeling that chill seeping from my bones finally dissipated somewhat. From beginning to end, Adrian said no more words. He just stood there, watching Ethan embrace me, step by step walking out of that suffocating private room. My husband, no, my ex-husband, that man always high above controlling everything, for the first time, like an outsider, was completely isolated from my world. Walking to the restaurant door, a cold wind blew, I couldn't help shivering. Ethan stuffed me into his car, turning the heater to maximum. Why didn't you tell me in advance they arranged to meet you here? His tone carried reproach. I leaned on the passenger seat, watching him go around to the driver's seat, wearing only a thin shirt, feeling somewhat guilty. I thought I could handle it myself. He sighed, started the car but didn't drive off immediately, instead taking a clean blanket from the back seat to cover me. Don't do this again. You're not alone now, why act tough? Looking at his serious driving profile, my nose soured, wanting to cry again. Hey, don't cry. He seemed to have eyes in the back of his head, fumbling a pack of tissues from the glove compartment and handing it to me. If you cry more, the baby will laugh at you. At home, I'll make ginger soup and your favorite sweet and sour ribs, okay? I responded muffledly. The car smoothly merged into traffic, leaving that high-end restaurant and the people inside far behind. I knew Ethan's mention of police and surveillance was mostly a bluff. Restaurants of that level protect privacy in private rooms very well, surveillance is impossible. But he bet on Selena's guilt and Adrian's hesitation at that moment. He won the bet. And Adrian, he stood in front of the private room's floor-to-ceiling window, watching that white Volvo disappear into the night. That car was ordinary, incomparable to any in his garage. But it was that car that took away the woman who once belonged to him. He slowly picked up the DNA report soaked in red wine. 183, the writing on it was somewhat blurred, but the 99.99% number was still glaring. He recalled Ethan's words, forged this ridiculous report. Adrian. Ryan came in at some point, cautiously speaking, Miss Selena she. Tell her to get lost. Adrian's voice had no warmth. He crumpled the report into a ball and threw it into the trash. Then, he took out his phone and dialed another number. Help me check a private clinic, and redo a paternity test. Use the fastest speed. Hanging up, he lit a cigarette, taking a deep drag. In the swirling smoke, for the first time, he began to doubt if he had been outrageously wrong these 3 years. He had always thought Vivian was docile, without claws. As long as he wanted, he could hold her in his palm any time. But he forgot that even a rabbit bites when cornered. Moreover, she was never a rabbit. She just retracted all her edges and sharpness for him. And now, she showed gentleness to another man. On the way home, Ethan received a call from the hospital, saying there was an emergency patient in critical condition, needing him to return immediately. He hung up, his face full of apology. Vivian, I have to go back to the hospital first. It's okay, go quickly, work is important. I waved casually, feigning ease. He was still worried, parking the car by the roadside, instructing me several times, go home and take a hot bath immediately, the ginger soup is in the thermos, remember to drink it. I ordered takeout for dinner, it should arrive soon. If you feel any discomfort, call me right away. Got it, Dr. Ethan, you're naggier than my mom. I couldn't help laughing at him. He then helplessly shook his head, called a car for me, watched me get in, then hurriedly returned to the hospital. I returned to the apartment alone, took a bath, drank the ginger soup, feeling revived. The takeout arrived on time, from my favorite Sichuan restaurant. I sat under the warm light, slowly eating, but my heart couldn't calm down. Not long after I left, Ryan drove over. Adrian, it's all clear. Ryan handed over a new file, Miss Selena bribed the clinic's nurse, switched her and Dr. Ethan's samples. The file also had photos of Selena meeting the nurse in a coffee shop. Adrian flipped through expressionlessly, but the veins on the back of his hand bulged one by one. Where is she? I've sent people to invite her over, she's in the car. Adrian pulled open the car door and got in. Seeing him, Selena immediately cried pitifully, Adrian, listen to my explanation, I didn't mean it, I just love you too much, I'm afraid of losing you. But Adrian was too lazy to even give her a glance, just throwing the file at her face. Get lost. He said only one word. Selena was completely stunned, she probably didn't expect that after waiting 10 years and scheming so long, she only got one word in the end. Adrian, you can't treat Ryan. Adrian interrupted her, his voice cold as ice, send her away, to where she belongs. Also, notify the Sue family that our cooperation ends here. Yes, Adrian. Selena was dragged off the car by 2 bodyguards. She was still hysterically screaming and cursing, but soon the sounds disappeared behind the car door. The car returned to quiet. Ryan, from the rearview mirror, looked at his boss's face gloomy enough to drip water, not daring to breathe loudly. After a long time, Adrian spoke again, his voice carrying fatigue. Go check the hospital where Vivian had the surgery back then, retrieve all medical records and operation notes. He suddenly wanted to know what that child he personally killed took from Vivian. Her healthy body? Or that heart that once loved him? The investigation results came out quickly. Ryan placed a thick medical record on Adrian's desk. Adrian, Miss Vivian's surgery back then caused severe intrauterine adhesions. The attending doctor said her chance of natural conception is almost 0. Adrian's hand holding the record trembled. Then now. Dr. Ethan is an expert in this field, Ryan said lowly. It was he who personally performed the hysteroscopic adhesiolysis on Miss Vivian, and conditioned her for over half a year, before. Ryan didn't dare continue. The office fell into deathly silence. Outside the window, the sky gradually darkened, the city's neon lights lit up one by one. Adrian just sat there motionless until he was completely swallowed by darkness. He recalled Vivian's words. Finding someone I love to marry, having our own child. It turned out her life plan had long excluded him. In her most painful and desperate times, the one by her side healing her was another man. He not only lost his wife but also a child that should have been his. He picked up his phone, as if possessed, dialing that number etched in his heart. The phone rang for a long time before being answered. Hello? It was Ethan's voice, with Vivian's laughing voice in the background. They were discussing the baby's name. At that instant, Adrian felt his heart as if ruthlessly crushed by a hand. He said nothing, silently hanging up. He thought, in this lifetime, he probably would never have a child again. Nor a woman named Vivian, leaving a light on for him every late night to come home.